is a moment, and most people will never experience it, and for that, they should be grateful. There is a moment when you look at the face of someone you love, someone you have been building a future with, someone you have trusted with your mornings and your evenings and your most private fears, and something inside you goes completely, absolutely still. Not because of anything they said, not because of anything you found, but because of something small, something almost invisible. A detail so minor that you would have missed it yesterday, and the day before that, and every single day for the past year and a half. But tonight, in the low light of an apartment that was supposed to become your home, you didn't miss it. Tonight, you saw it. And the second you did, you understood with the kind of clarity that only terror can produce, that the man sitting across from you was not who he said he was, that he had never been who he said he was, and that you had come within 24 hours of making the worst, and possibly the last, mistake of your life. This is the story of Rachel Simmons, a woman who survived something that should have killed her, rebuilt herself from the inside out, found love again, and came within one night of being destroyed by the same man who had nearly broken her the first time. A man who had been so consumed by his obsession with her that he did something so calculated, so methodical, so deeply disturbing, that when law enforcement heard the full story, several of them said they had never seen anything like it in their careers. A man who walked out of prison, went under a surgeon's knife, built a brand new identity, found Rachel on a dating app, courted her for over a year, got down on one knee, and almost made her his wife for the second time. His name was Marcus Webb, but by the time Rachel met him again, she didn't know that, because by then he was calling himself Derek Cole. Before we go any further, drop your location in the comments right now and let us know where you're watching from. We genuinely love hearing from our community all around the world. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear is the kind of story that reminds you exactly why this channel exists. Stay with us, because this story does not go where you think it's going. And the ending, the real ending, is something you need to hear all the way through to understand. Rachel Simmons grew up in Columbus, Ohio, the second of 3 daughters in a household that was loud and warm and full of strong opinions around the dinner table. Her mother worked as a school administrator. Her father drove long-haul trucks and was home on weekends with a kind of deliberate, concentrated presence, the kind of man who made up for absence with intention. Rachel was, by every account from people who knew her then, the kind of person who made a room feel more settled just by walking into it. She was not the loudest voice. She was not the one demanding attention. She was the one people sought out when something went wrong, the one who listened without needing to fix everything immediately. Her childhood friends describe her the same way, almost word for word: grounded, loyal. The kind of woman who, when she loved you, made you feel like the most important person in any room. She studied communications at Ohio State, graduated in 2009, and moved to Indianapolis for a job at a mid-sized marketing firm where she quickly distinguished herself as someone who understood not just strategy, but people. She could read a room. She could anticipate what someone needed before they articulated it. Her colleagues respected her. Her clients liked her. She had a small group of close friends, a 2-bedroom apartment she was genuinely proud of, and a life that was, by any reasonable measure, going exactly the way she had hoped it would. She was not perfect. She would tell you that herself. She was occasionally too accommodating. She gave people more chances than they deserved. She believed, with a kind of stubborn optimism that would later cost her enormously, that most people, when given enough patience and enough grace, would eventually choose to be better. That belief was not a flaw. It was a gift she had. But gifts, in the wrong hands, become vulnerabilities. And Rachel's patience, her extraordinary, faithful, almost limitless patience, was about to be exploited by someone who had identified it as the easiest way in. She met Marcus Webb at a mutual friend's birthday gathering in the summer of 2012. He was 34 at the time. He was confident without being loud about it. He dressed well. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers, which is rarer than it should be. He made Rachel laugh twice in the first conversation, which she would later tell her sister was the thing that got her. Not his looks, not his job. The fact that he was funny in a way that felt effortless and real, rather than performed. He called the next day, not 3 days later, the next day, and he was direct about it. He told her he had thought about her all night and didn't see the point in pretending otherwise. Rachel, who had spent years dating men who performed indifference as a strategy, found that directness startling and completely disarming. She said yes when he asked her to dinner. She said yes to the second dinner, and the third. By the time autumn arrived in Indianapolis, they were spending most of their evenings together. And Rachel Simmons, for the first time in a long time, was genuinely happy. The first sign came 6 months in. It was small enough that she almost didn't register it as a sign at all. They had argued about something trivial, the kind of argument couples have when they're still learning each other's edges, and Marcus had gone quiet in a way that was different from the quiet she had seen before. This wasn't the quiet of someone processing. It was something colder. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't say anything cruel. He simply went still and looked at her with an expression she had no category for yet. And then the moment passed and he was himself again, warm and attentive and apologetic in a way that made her feel like she had imagined something. She filed it away, put it in a drawer in the back of her mind and closed it. She would open that drawer many times over the next 3 years, and each time she did, there would be something new inside it. The escalation was gradual enough that, looking back, Rachel has said the hardest part is not the events themselves, but the pace of them. Because when something builds that slowly, you don't experience it as a descent. You experience it as your new normal, and then your new normal after that, and then the new normal after that, until one day you realize you have traveled so far from who you were that you barely recognize the landscape around you. Marcus became more controlling through 2013. He had opinions about who she saw and how often. He wanted to know where she was. He framed all of it as love, as caring, as the natural instinct of a man who didn't want to lose something important to him. And because Rachel was a patient woman who believed in giving grace, she adjusted. She checked in more. She declined some invitations. She told herself that what looked like control was actually devotion, and that the difference between the two was something she could navigate. She was wrong, but she would not know how wrong for another 2 years. The physical violence began in late 2014. Rachel has been careful, in the accounts she has given, not to identify a single first incident as the beginning, because she says that framing is itself part of the distortion. There was no clean beginning. There was a pattern that arrived in pieces, each one just inside the line of what she told herself she could survive, until the line had moved so far that she had lost sight of where it used to be. What she will say is that, by the beginning of 2015, she was living in a version of her own life that she did not recognize. She was covering things, making excuses, adjusting her behavior to manage his. She had told no one the full truth because saying it out loud would have made it real in a way she was not yet ready for. Her sister noticed something was off. Her closest friend from college, a woman named Dana, had stopped being invited over and had started calling more frequently with a careful, deliberate tone in her voice that Rachel heard, but couldn't respond to honestly. Not yet. By the spring of 2016, Rachel had made a decision. It had not come suddenly. It had come the way most real decisions come, not as a single moment of clarity, but as the accumulated weight of too many moments finally becoming more than one person can carry alone. She had begun documenting things quietly. Photographs she kept on a cloud account Marcus didn't know existed. Dates and details written in a notes app behind a password. She had spoken, carefully and partially, to a domestic violence advocate she found through an online resource. She had a plan. It was not a reckless plan or an emotional one. It was the plan of a woman who understood that leaving badly was more dangerous than leaving well, and who was determined to leave well. On a Tuesday in April of 2016, while Marcus was at work, Rachel gathered what she needed, went to the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department, and gave a statement that was thorough, documented, and devastating in its detail. Marcus Webb was arrested 2 days later. The charges were serious. The evidence Rachel had compiled methodically, quietly, over months, was exactly the kind of evidence that prosecutors needed and rarely got. He was convicted in February of 2017 and sentenced to 7 years. Rachel was in the courtroom when the verdict was read. She did not cry. The people with her that day, her mother, her sister, Dana, said she sat completely still and then exhaled slowly, like someone who had been holding their breath for years. She was 30 years old. She had just gotten her life back, or at least that was what everyone in that courtroom believed on that day. What nobody in that courtroom knew, what nobody outside of a correctional facility in Indiana would know for years, was that Marcus Webb had not accepted what happened. He had not processed it. He had not, in any meaningful sense of the word, moved on. He had arrived at Pendleton Correctional Facility in the summer of 2017 with something intact inside him that the legal system does not have the tools to measure. An obsession so total, so consuming, so resistant to consequence that incarceration had not diminished it by a single degree. It had given it structure. It had given it time. And it had given it walls. Correctional officers at Pendleton would later note, in documented reports that became part of the broader case file, that Marcus Webb was not a difficult inmate in the traditional sense. He did not cause problems. He did not start conflicts. He was quiet, compliant, and kept to himself in a way that read, on the surface, as someone doing their time with discipline. But sometime in his second year, a corrections officer conducting a routine cell inspection noticed something on the far wall of Marcus Webb's cell that stopped him where he stood. It was not words. It was not gang symbols or the usual markings that accumulate on prison cell walls over years of occupation. It was a face, carved into the concrete with what appeared to be a sharpened edge of some kind, patient, deliberate, worked on over time. And it was the same face, repeated. Multiple times across the same wall, always the same features, always the same eyes. The officer who filed the report described it as one of the most unsettling things he had encountered in 11 years in corrections, because it wasn't angry. It didn't look like rage or hatred carved into a wall. It looked like longing, and somehow that was worse. The face on the wall was Rachel's. Marcus Webb had spent months, possibly the better part of 2 years, carving her face into the concrete of his cell, over and over, with the focused patience of a man who had nowhere else to put what he was feeling. He was evaluated. The findings were documented, but he was not a man who expressed violent intent in ways that the institutional system could easily act on. He was not making threats. He was not writing manifestos. He was carving a face. And so the reports were filed, the documentation accumulated, and Marcus Webb continued to serve his sentence with the same quiet compliance that had characterized him from the beginning. From the outside, he looked like a man doing his time. On the inside, he was doing something else entirely. He was planning, and the walls of his cell were not a symptom of madness. They were a rehearsal. He was released in the spring of 2024, having served 7 years. Rachel was living in Cincinnati by then. She had moved twice since the trial, once to put distance between herself and Indianapolis, and once more because she had found a neighborhood and a community that felt genuinely like home. She had done years of therapy. She had rebuilt her professional life from the inside out, eventually launching a small consulting practice that she ran primarily remotely. She had a close circle of friends who knew pieces of her story. She had Dana, who had stayed through everything and remained the kind of friend whose loyalty was not contingent on Rachel being okay. She had her sister, her mother, a life that was genuinely hers in a way it had not been for years. She was not defined by what she had survived. She was something much larger than that, and in the cautious, deliberate way of a woman who had learned to trust her instincts again. She had recently, very recently, started to think about what it might look like to let someone new in. Marcus Webb, in the months between his release and what came next, had not returned to Indianapolis. He had not attempted to contact Rachel through any of the channels she had locked him out of. He had not violated his release conditions in any way that law enforcement could detect. What he had done, and what investigators would later piece together in granular, staggering detail, was embark on a process of transformation so deliberate and so extreme that it constituted, by any reasonable measure, one of the most premeditated acts of obsession ever documented in a domestic violence case in this country. He had found a surgeon, not a local one. He had traveled. He had consultations. He had saved money. The how of that is still not entirely clear. And over the course of approximately 8 months following his release, Marcus Webb underwent reconstructive facial surgery that altered his jawline, his nose, the shape of his eyes, and the overall geometry of his face to a degree that made him, to anyone who had not memorized his features, an entirely different person. He also changed his name legally to Derek Cole. And he obtained documentation, a new social media presence, and a carefully constructed backstory to support that identity. He was thorough. He was patient. And he was, in every measurable way, completely unrecognizable as the man Rachel Simmons had helped put in prison 8 years earlier. There was one thing the surgery could not change. A scar on the left side of his jaw, running approximately 2 inches toward his chin, irregular in shape, the result of a construction accident in his early 20s that had required 16 stitches and had left the kind of mark that sits too deep in the tissue to respond to surface-level correction. It was small. It was easily overlooked. Most people who met Derek Cole would never notice it unless they were looking closely, in good light, from exactly the right angle. Marcus Webb had apparently decided that the risk it posed was acceptable. Perhaps he calculated that Rachel would never look that closely again. Perhaps he believed that enough time and enough change had buried it sufficiently. Or perhaps, in the psychology of a man who had spent 7 years carving someone's face into a prison wall, the scar was not something he was capable of thinking clearly about. Whatever his reasoning, he left it. And that decision, that single, small, catastrophic miscalculation, would ultimately be his undoing. He found her on a dating app in the fall of 2024. The profile she had created was careful, no last name, limited location data, photographs that did not show her workplace or neighborhood. She had been encouraged by Dana to try it, had approached it with the measured skepticism of someone who understood better than most that not everything is what it presents itself as. The profile that matched with hers was for a man named Derek Cole, 43 years old, based in Cincinnati, working in logistics management. His photographs showed a man who was, by any conventional standard, attractive and well-presented. Nothing in the profile triggered anything in her. Why would it? The face in those photographs belonged to a man named Derek Cole. Marcus Webb no longer existed in any form she could have accessed. They matched on a Wednesday. He messaged her Thursday morning, not with a line, with a question, a real one referencing something specific in her profile that showed he had actually read it. She appreciated that. She wrote back. He wrote back. The conversation moved over the following weeks from the app to text messages and then to phone calls. He was steady. He did not push. He matched her pace in a way that, in retrospect, she understands was deliberate. He knew her pace. He had said it the first time. He knew exactly how much space to give her to feel safe enough to come closer, because he had watched her close that exact distance once before, years ago, when he had been a different face operating the same strategy. They met in person for the first time in November of 2024, at a coffee shop in Kenwood that Rachel had chosen because she felt comfortable there, and because it was public, and because, after everything, she still ran those calculations before she agreed to meet anyone new. The man who walked in was Derek Cole in every visible sense. He had a new face, a new name, a rehearsed backstory, and years of accumulated motivation to get this right. He was charming. He was warm. He was attentive without being overwhelming. Rachel told Dana afterward that she had gone in expecting nothing and come home surprised. She said he felt, and she would later find this word haunting in its accuracy, he felt familiar. Like someone she already understood somehow, without being able to explain why. Dana told her that was a good sign. Neither of them knew what it actually was. The relationship developed through the winter of 2024 and into early 2025. Derek was consistent in ways that Rachel had learned to value over the years of rebuilding. He showed up when he said he would. He followed through on small things. He did not disappear for days without explanation. He expressed interest in her work, her friendships, her history, in ways that felt genuine rather than interrogative. He suggested they move slowly, which she appreciated, and which was also, she would later understand, a tactical choice. A man who had committed to a years-long plan did not need to rush the final 100 meters. He was also, subtly and with great skill, managing her exposure to the people in her life who might have known Marcus Webb. He showed little interest in meeting her Columbus connections. When her sister visited Cincinnati for a weekend, Derek was gracious but brief, citing a work commitment. When Dana organized a group dinner, Derek had a prior engagement. He was never obstructive about it. He never made it a conflict. He simply found reasonable explanations for never being in a room where someone from Rachel's previous life might look at him for long enough, from close enough, to feel something pull at the back of their memory. He proposed on a Saturday evening in March of 2025 at a restaurant overlooking the Ohio River. Rachel said yes. She was 38 years old. She had survived something that had taken years and a tremendous amount of courage to walk away from. She had done the work. She had rebuilt herself. And she had, with great care and great vulnerability, let someone back in. The yes she gave Derek Cole on that Saturday evening was not naive. It was not reckless. It was the yes of a woman who had every reason to believe that the man kneeling in front of her was exactly who he said he was, and who had finally, after years of practicing trust in small doses, extended it fully. It was the bravest thing she had done since 2016, and it was aimed at the wrong person. They planned a small courthouse wedding for a Friday in May. The decision to keep it intimate was mutual. Rachel had always found large ceremonies performative, and Derek, predictably, had no interest in the extended family gatherings that weddings tend to produce. They would marry at the courthouse with Dana and one of Derek's colleagues as witnesses and celebrate with dinner afterward. It was simple. It was right-sized. And with every day that brought it closer, Rachel felt something she had not felt in a very long time, the uncomplicated forward momentum of a life that was going the way she wanted it to. The Thursday before the wedding, Derek came over to her apartment. They were not planning anything significant for the evening. They cooked dinner together, which had become one of their rituals, Rachel on the main dish, Derek on whatever he decided to contribute, the kitchen small enough that they were always in each other's orbit. After dinner, they sat on the couch talking the way couples do the night before something significant, that particular quality of conversation that is less about information and more about presence. The apartment was lit the way apartments get at night, when nobody has bothered to turn on the overhead lights, table lamps, the glow from the kitchen, the particular warmth of low and indirect light that softens everything in the room. And in that light, at that angle, at that distance, Rachel looked at Derek Cole's face and saw the scar. She had seen it before, not consciously, not in a way that had registered as anything beyond the kind of small physical detail you accumulate about someone you're close to without cataloging, but something in the configuration of the light, or the angle of his jaw as he laughed at something she had said, or some combination of factors that she has never been able to fully account for. Something made her look at it differently in that specific moment. The scar was on the left side of his jaw. It ran approximately 2 inches downward, irregular at the edges, the particular texture of old deep tissue repair. She had seen it on Derek before and not thought twice about it. She had seen it on Marcus Webb every day for 3 years. And somewhere in the part of her brain that stores the things that mattered most when everything was most dangerous, those 2 files were sitting right next to each other. And in the low light of her apartment, the night before her wedding, they connected. She did not react. This is the detail that everyone who hears this story eventually focuses on, because it speaks to something essential about who Rachel Simmons is. She did not gasp. She did not confront him. She did not let the recognition show on her face in any way that he could have detected and responded to. She had learned, over 3 years with Marcus Webb, how to control what her face communicated when her body was sending entirely different signals. That skill, which had been learned under duress, and which she had spent years in therapy trying to unlearn, saved her life on a Thursday evening in May of 2025. She looked at the scar. She looked at his face. She smiled at whatever he had just said. And she told him she needed to step out to her car because she thought she had left her phone charger in it. She did not go back inside. She got into her car, locked the doors, and called 911. She was calm on the call. Calmer, the dispatcher said later, than almost anyone who called with information of that magnitude. She gave her address. She gave Derek Cole's name and physical description. She gave her name. And then she said, "I believe the man inside my apartment is Marcus Webb. He was convicted of domestic violence and released from Pendleton Correctional in 2024. I think he had surgery to change his face, and I think he's been using a different name. There's a scar on his jaw that I recognized tonight. Please send someone quickly." Police arrived within 11 minutes. Derek Cole, Marcus Webb, was still in Rachel's apartment, waiting for her to come back from the car. He had been waiting long enough that he may have already understood something had shifted, but not long enough to have made a decision about it. When officers entered and identified him and asked for his legal name, he said Derek Cole. When they ran his fingerprints, the system returned Marcus Webb. He was arrested without incident. He did not say anything when they cuffed him, according to the officers present. He looked at the door of Rachel's apartment, the door she had walked out of and not come back through, and he did not speak. The charges that followed were extensive: stalking, violation of post-release supervision conditions, identity fraud, conspiracy to commit domestic abuse under Indiana statute. Prosecutors also moved to introduce the prison documentation, the reports about the cell, the carvings, the psychiatric evaluations, as evidence of the premeditated nature of his conduct. A judge reviewing the full case file reportedly described it as one of the most comprehensive documented cases of targeted obsession she had encountered on the bench. Marcus Webb, facing charges that carried a potential aggregate sentence of over 20 years, was remanded without bail. As of the time this story was produced, the case was in pretrial proceedings. He is not expected to see the outside of a correctional facility again for a very long time. Rachel Simmons did not attend the courthouse that Friday, not for the reason she had been planning to. She was with Dana and with her sister and with her mother in the apartment she had been so close to leaving behind, and she was doing what she had taught herself to do every time something too large arrived without warning. She was breathing through it and staying in her body and trusting that she knew how to survive. She was 38 years old. She had now survived Marcus Webb twice. She had every intention of spending the rest of her life making sure there was no third time. There is something this story asks of every person who hears it, not just the obvious thing, the call to recognize the warning signs, or to trust your instincts, or to understand that obsession does not dissolve because a prison term ends. It asks something harder than that. It asks us to sit with the reality that the systems we have built to protect people like Rachel, the courts, the convictions, the correctional facilities, the supervised release protocols, are necessary and important and profoundly insufficient when the person they are trying to contain has decided, at a level of commitment that most of us cannot conceptualize, that no system is going to stop them. Marcus Webb did not succeed, but the reason he did not succeed was not the system. The reason he did not succeed was a woman who had spent years learning to read danger in small details, who trusted what she saw in a split second, and who was smart enough and disciplined enough to leave without giving him the chance to respond. The system caught him after. She saved herself first. What does it take to recognize danger when it has changed its face? What does it ask of a person who has already survived once to stay vigilant enough to survive again? And what does it say about the nature of obsession? About the specific, terrifying category of person who responds to consequence not by stopping, but by adapting, that we do not yet have reliable tools to identify until they are already at the door. These are not comfortable questions. They are the right ones. And Rachel Simmons, who is still in Cincinnati, who is still in therapy, who is still, by her own account, figuring out what the rest of her life looks like after this, deserves to have them asked loudly and often. We would love to hear your thoughts on this. Drop them in the comments below. Tell us where you're watching from, tell us what this story brought up for you, and if you haven't already subscribed to this channel, now is the time. Because the next story coming to Stories We Don't Tell is one that stayed with us long after we finished researching it, and we think it will do the same for you. Don't find out about it after everyone else. Subscribe now, and we'll see you in the next one.